A midnight rider rode out on a quest. His quest was to look for the city of the sun. They called him the Midnight Rider because he traveled at night. He rested during the day and traveled through the night. His journey was difficult through unknown territory. He knew what he was looking for, but he didn't know where he was going. One night he came to a lake, and as his horse was drinking, he heard a commanding voice. "Pick up some stones and carry them. And when you come to the city of the sun, you will be sad and you will be happy." He looked around, but he couldn't see anyone, but he picked up some stones and he went on his way. A while later, he was sleeping in a cave, and he woke to hear this voice say to him, "Pick up some stones and carry them. And when you come to the city of the sun, you will be both sad and happy." A while later, he was crossing a river, and he heard the voice a third time that said, "Pick up some stones. And when you come to the city of the sun, you will be both sad and happy." And so this time, he filled his pockets to overflowing, and he continued on his journey. And he came to a valley with steep sides, and he made his way carefully down. And as he was going up the other side, the road was difficult. It was very difficult. And he realized it was difficult because of the burden. It was difficult because of all these stones he had in his pockets. And so he took a handful and threw them out. And a little bit further, he took another handful and threw them away. And another, and another. And just as he got to the top, he looked and he saw the sun rising and the golden city of the sun. And he put his hand in his pockets, his now almost empty pockets. And he took out 3 stones. And he was sad and he was happy. He was sad for what he had thrown away, but he was happy because in his hand, he had 3 beautiful, priceless pearls. We are on a journey, and we are going to the city of the sun. And God has a quest. And we heard half of the quest in the scripture reading. The other half of the quest we find in Jeremiah 5 and verse 1, which says, "Go up and down the streets of Jerusalem. Look and consider. Search through her squares and find me a man." Now, I would like to suggest today that we could say it is find me a woman, Find me a man, find me a person who will go. God is looking for people. People who are not just living for here and now and today, but people who are looking for eternity. And those who take up this challenge need 3 pearls. They need the pearl of vision. They need the pearl of commitment. They need the pearl of focusing on the reward. But it's not just any vision. It is a God-called vision. It's not just any commitment. It is not what will make you start. It is what will make you stop. And focusing on the reward sounds rather selfish, but it's not. Because the reward that we're talking of is when we come to that city of the sun, that we will not be by ourselves, that we will be there with other people who we have had the privilege of influencing, of inviting, of saying, come with me to the city of the sun. Now, we're going to look at those 3 pearls. But we're going to look at it in the context of God's quest. Find me a woman, find me a man who will go. This afternoon we have a 90th anniversary lecture. So this entity that you don't know what it is 90 years old. So it's reaching its maturity. And this afternoon, David Trim will tell us a little bit about it. But I thought, how much do you know about Salisbury, Keough, Murdoch, Bartlett, Scoil? They're names you use every single day. But how much do you know about them? Find me a man, find me a woman who will go and who will have vision. William Gordon Campbell Murdoch Hall, was a man of vision who responded to God's call, I need a man. He was born in the Scottish uplands, so a long way from here, in the middle of nowhere, one of 10 children. He left school when he was 14 years old. And for the next 4 years, he was a farmhand. He looked after sheep and cows, and that was his destiny. But somebody came along and sold some literature to the Murdoch family. And so it was that the whole Murdoch clan, 5 boys and 5 girls, and the parents all became Seventh-day Adventists. And so as an 18-year-old, he traveled south to Stanborough Missionary College, which was a forerunner of Newbold College. And there he enrolled for the ministerial course. When he finished his last year, and those of you who study will be in awe, at least I hope you are in awe, I was in awe. His final year, he taught Greek and Hebrew, as well as doing his studies. He was asked to stay on and continue teaching. And in 1928, he made the trip to America, where he got a BA in theology and history. and was invited at the grand old age of 26 to come back and to be the principal of Newbold College. Wow. Now, he didn't come back to a nice campus like this, where everything was in place. He came back at a time when the college was moving from London up to the north of England, just south of Birmingham, to a place called Newbold Revel, where we get our name. And, moving an institution isn't easy, but this young man holds new staff, students together, forms the family, gets it going. And he recognizes that he needs some more education. And education in the 1930s is not easily come by. But again, he goes to America and he gets an MA in Semitic languages. He comes, while he's there, he marries his true love, which he met when he went there first time round. And he and Ruth come back to teach at Newbold. But the First World War comes along, and the government decides that they want Newbold Revel. And these Adventists are really an awkward lot, because after all, they are pacifists, and they don't want to give up their college. And so it is left to William Murdoch to negotiate and to have what they called a hasty exodus. They moved with 1 foot of snow on the ground to Packwood Hall. Now, this was not ideal. They built 3 sheds. No sanitation, no heating, just a coke stove for the male students. When it rained, they had a flood inside. And this is where they lived. The staff had it marginally better. 4 families lived in one house, and one had an outhouse that had been converted. And this young man kept it all together. And then 4 years later, the war is over, and the government says, "Would you like your property back?" And they say no. Let's find somewhere else. And so it was William Murdoch who helped to find Newbold College as we know it is today. But he didn't stay to settle the family in here, so to speak. He was asked if he would go to Australia. Now, I went to Australia for the first time a year ago, and it's a long way, 36 hours, and it was horrible. It was wonderful when I got there, but getting there and getting back. But for him, it wasn't 36 hours on a plane, it was weeks on a boat, with no real possibility or no thought of coming home for a holiday. And he took what was another small institution and gave it the foundations of Avondale College today. He could have chosen to have stayed here. He was a big fish in a little pond, but he chose instead to follow the call of God. Ultimately, that call took him to America, and he became the dean of the seminary at Andrews University. He and Ruth had a vision of Adventist education, a vision of serving God. God said, "Find me a man, find me a woman who will go." And William and Ruth Murdoch said, "Here are we." Philip Scoyle is another one, and I don't have a picture of Philip Scoyle. You'll have to go out and look at him on, oh no, yes, in the hallway. He's there. His name is not English, and yet he was English. His roots are in the Netherlands. He trained to be a draftsman. He went into the family business. He had no intention of ever being a pastor or a teacher. But his father died. The family business was sold, and he came to Stanborough College. At 24, very old age, he was asked to go to Friedensau in Germany to teach English, and from there to Ekebyholm in Sweden, where he met and married his wife. He was one of the first people to get a PhD from London University. A brilliant scholar who could have made his name in academia anywhere. And he chose to teach at Newbold. And he is known for being kind to the slow learner, supportive of the financially embarrassed, and encouraging to the discouraged. But when God says, find me a woman, find me a man who will go, it's not enough just to have a vision. It's what will stop you once you start going. What will make you keep on going, or what will make you stop? Homer Salisbury, Salisbury Hall, named after Homer Salisbury. He was an American, born in the home of Adventism in Battle Creek. Early on, he went to South Africa, he taught. He had a little taste of England because he came for 1 year to study in London, again Hebrew. And then he returned to the States, back to his roots, back to Battle Creek. He taught history and Hebrew. In 1900, so 19 years ago, the church in England decided they wanted a college to train men and women. And so they began to fundraise. They said, we need £1,000. They got 250, and they began to look for a man. They found that person in Homer Russell Salisbury. He came with his wife, Lena, and in 1902, 6th of January, Newbold, well, it was called Duncan Hall College, opened its doors, and 21 students came. No, 32 students came for 21 weeks. And then they had to go and sell books to raise enough money to come back. Now, what was the importance of what he did? You know, if you know anything about Adventist history, names like Stephen Haskell, John Loughborough, E.J. Wagner, then they're big names in Adventism, and they were the ones who came to the UK. But what about English people? What about Scandinavians? What about people from Holland? What about national people leading the church? And that's what Newbold was about. And that's what Homer Salisbury created in the first 6 years. But you know, when you're successful, you're often called to go somewhere else. And he was called to go back to Washington to head up a missionary school to train people who would go out as missionaries. He did that. He became Education Secretary of the General Conference. But in 1913, he was asked to go to India, to be a missionary again, because, coming to the UK, he was a missionary. And so he went. And 2 years later, he was invited to be a delegate at the General Conference session. And so he asked his wife, Lena, come with me. We can go home. We can visit family. And she said, no, there's too much to do here. I will stay. You go. During this General Conference session, he got a message. Lena wasn't well. And he wanted to go home. Now, from the west coast of the States, there's two ways to India. You can go via the Pacific, or you can come back and go over the Atlantic. The Atlantic way was quicker. 1915, there is war in Europe. He chooses, against all good advice, to come across the Atlantic, to travel through France, and he got on the SS Persia. The 30th of December, 1915, the SS Persia was torpedoed by a German submarine. Within seconds, the boat ceased to exist. Few people survived, and those who did were people who were on the deck or near the deck. Homer Salisbury was one of those people who made it into the water with a life belt on. He saw a woman who had no life belt, and he took off his and gave it to her. And he went down with the SS Persia. But what about Lena? Lena is in Africa, in India, not well. But she says, I will stay and I will finish what we started. And so she stayed. She stayed for another year until her health really did begin to give and went back to the States. But 5 years later, she's called to Keough. Children of missionary parents, grew up in Switzerland. She could speak French fluently, and she went to teach languages at Keough. A year later, she contracted pneumonia and died. Her obituary describes her like this: a Dorcas in her untiring service for others, a Mary enduring suffering, sorrows, and disappointment, a Martha in thoughtfulness for the comfort of all, a Ruth in fidelity to friends, a Naomi in faithful, loving devotion to the memory of her lost companion. Homer and Lena Salisbury were committed, and they did not give up. Nothing could make them give up. God says, find me a man. Find me a woman with vision who will go. God says, find me a woman, find me a man with commitment who will go. And find me a person who will focus on the reward. George Dorkin Keough is my personal hero. The male residence Keough House is named after him. Maybe it is we share common roots. His parents were Irish. He was born in Scotland. He came down to Stanborough Missionary College, entered the ministry in 1905, and in 1909, he is called with his wife to go to Egypt. Now, at this stage, when people went out as missionaries to Egypt, they concentrated on what we call the expats, the intelligent, the rich, the people of a European background. And Keough said, that is not for me. And so he went to Upper Egypt, to the villages, and he rented a flat, an apartment, on the 6th floor, where during the day it was over 50 degrees. He said the only thing he could do during the day was use his shoe to kill the cockroaches. It was too hot to do anything else. But his idea was mingle with people, get to know them. For the first 6 months, he had no money, absolutely none. And he would come down every night, because in that heat, nothing kept, and he would haggle. And he would haggle for vegetables, and he would haggle for meat. And yeah, they would eat, and he would learn Arabic. After 3 months, he went to the butcher. Now, you have to remember, those who get up on the health message, we are back in the early 1900s. So just cut him a little bit of slack. So he went to the butcher, and the butcher said to him this night, you know, Mr. Keough, you have paid the maximum price for the worst meat. But I see that you are a Christian, a true Christian. From here on, you will pay the least amount of money for the best meat. At the end of his first year, living in the villages, Conradi, who was in charge of all of this, came and said to him, you know, get back to Cairo. You should not be here. And Keough said, no. Why did he say no? He had baptized 18 people. He had his eye on the reward of seeing people in the city of the sun. He was an intolerant man. You know, if people didn't agree, he would soon tell them what he thought. And yet, when he came as an old man to teach at Newbold, he is remembered by his students with warmth and affection. He had a childlike faith. When he was a very old man and living in Northern Ireland, he was going one day to pay a check into the bank. Now, some of you may not even know what checks are, but you know, they were pieces of paper that you got, and someone said, I promise to pay, and they had to be paid into a bank account. It was a windy day, and he was holding the check. A gust of wind came and blew the check away. Keough was an old man. He couldn't run after it. The pastor who was with him ran after it, but the check was gone. And Keough just said, don't worry, it's in the Lord's hands. The pastor was very worried. But 2 days later, George Keough got a phone call from the bank telling him that someone had just paid in the check to his account. He was a man of faith. He was faithful to God, but God was faithful to him. God has a quest. Find me a woman. Find me a man. Find me a person who will go. So the question is, who will take up the vision of God's call? Who will be so committed that it doesn't matter in the face of death itself, you will be faithful? And who will focus on the prize of being there in the city of the sun, not by yourself, but with those who you have influenced, who you have talked to, who you have invited to come on the journey? What is your answer this morning?